Welcome to the Book and You podcast alongside Tim Elmore. I'm Jared Cagle. Today, we're going to be talking about the 6 questions that are worth asking when you're evaluating your book ideas. Tim, excited to be with you today and ready to launch into this topic. You sent me a quote that I thought was so good, and that kind of spurred us on with this episode from Kevin Kelly, who co-founded Wired, New York Times, Wall Street Journal writer and author. He said this: separate the process of creating from improving.
Yeah.
You can't write and edit well at the same time. And if you do, the editor stops the creator.
Yeah.
At the start, the creator mind must be released and unleashed from judgment.
Yeah.
What a great quote.
It really is. And what I love most about it is, unless you're a technical writer, you're writing a training manual, you need creativity. And if you always are going back and judging or evaluating as you just create on paper, you're in trouble. So Kevin Kelly's just very, very wise. And I love that statement. So, and that's going to play right into where we're going today. Listeners, we really want to talk to you about the idea of, asking yourself questions before you get too kind of hot and heavy into the writing process. And part of the deal you're going to have to do is separate the big ideas from the subordinate ideas. If you're like most authors, you're going to have a truckload of ideas during your lifetime. I get them driving along the road or in a shower or whatever, and they're just going to come. In fact, I think every year the great authors would tell you, ideas are a dime a dozen. They're going to come and go. What you got to do is find the magic of deciding which ones are worth pursuing. And today we want to talk about asking yourself 7 questions that will help you know which ideas are worth pursuing. Jared, you and I were talking about music, and I think it actually ties in. Writing music is not unlike writing a book. So let me just confess, I'm a baby boomer. That's a confession. Okay. So, Jared, you're not a baby boomer. So you've been around the earth a little less time than me, which may be your tremendous advantage right now. Okay. But I remember Elton John. I grew up with Elton John. 1970, I remember hearing songs that he wrote, and then all through the 70s, 80s, 90s, he has been writing and performing music for well over 50 years. Now, he has a co-writer. Bernie Taupin was the guy that actually wrote most of the lyrics for Elton John, and then Elton actually wrote the music. So a lyricist and a musician came together. They have made millions of dollars, doing this music thing. But I believe, in fact, I remember watching the movie on how their kind of music went back and forth, swapping back and forth. They swapped hundreds of songs back and forth. Some were good, others were better, and quite frankly, some never saw the light of day. And that is going to be true for you as well, writers listening. Some of your ideas are going to be good, others are better, and some, quite frankly, if you're honest with yourself, should not see the light of day. That doesn't mean you're bad as a writer. It just means you're normal. So many ideas will come and go. Okay. Some are one-hit wonders. Some authors are, that one book or that one song, we've all heard that term one-hit wonder, but I think we just need to recognize that each idea needs to be taken one at a time and should be evaluated along the way, one at a time. So Jared, I don't know if you want to say anything in response to that, but that's where we're going today.
Well, I love the connection with music and book writing. It's music sometimes is there's less margin for error. It's a smaller package. You got to catch people quickly. But at the same time, you talked about the generations, millennials, which is where I am, the generations to follow, Gen Z now. If you think about the attention span and the need to grab with a hook or with grab their attention, we could learn a lot from music. We could learn a lot from the way that songs are written. And I love that one of the best performers, one of the best songwriters of our time is on this list today for you to talk about as a collaborator. He didn't do
Yes.
it all
Yeah,
by himself. And
that's right.
if there's one thing we could leave you with, every time we want to say, hey, you don't have to do this by yourself. Don't go at it
Mm,
alone.
that's right.
Who's your team? We want to
That's
be a part of that. Tim and I are here to help you along
yeah.
your
Yeah.
journey. And we're hoping that today will be another good step for you and helpful as we consider these 7 questions.
So let's jump in. I'm about to give you, if you're making a mental list or if you're writing down a list, if you're driving, do not write it down. But let's talk about how to distinguish big ideas from sub ideas. Neither are wrong. They're just different. So here are the 7 questions. Number 1, ask yourself, is your idea life-changing? I realize that's a pithy phrase, a cliche today, life-changing. But I don't ever want to write a book unless I'm thinking to myself as I'm typing it out, this idea could change someone's life. In fact, it will. If they apply it, it will change their life. So Jared, I remember writing the book Generation IY. When it came out in 2010, that was, almost 15 years ago. It was one of a kind. I'm not saying it's the best book. I'm not J.K. Rowling. I'm not John Grisham. I'm not, these brilliant writers. But the book was about the second half of the millennial generation. So the generation, Jared, that you're a part of. I had been working with young people long enough to see that in 2010, when this book came out, the second half of the millennials were different than the first half. And I had not seen any book like this. So the 80s kids were different than the 90s kids. And I felt like we needed to address it because the millennials were being lumped in together by sports coaches, teachers, employers, and they were just different. So we actually at Growing Leaders self-published that book on Amazon, and we sold 250,000 copies. Now that would be expected maybe with Simon & Schuster or Thomas Nelson or HarperCollins, but this was a self-published book. But I think the reason it did well is not because I'm J.K. Rowling, but rather because it was an idea that was life-changing. Chapter by chapter, I remember writing things that I thought, if you will do this as you lead these young people, it will completely change the way you connect with them. And surprisingly, the book keeps selling. So evidently, something was right in that book. But it started with a question, is your idea life-changing? So I don't know if you want to volley back, Jared. You don't have to, but I want to give you a chance if you want to on that big idea.
Yeah, no. Well, I would ask you this, and for our readers, for our listeners that are listening in, a question that I would have is: did you know it was life changing before you wrote it, or after it started selling?
Gosh, I had that feeling, and it was only a feeling. I think this might be helpful. My wife laughs at me, Jared, because she'll hear me as she walks by the office. I'll be going, "Ooh, this is good."
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't have a self-esteem problem. But every now and then you have a feeling like, oh, I wish I would have read this. I wish I would have known this when I was a teacher or youth worker or whatever. So again, it is a feeling, but when it begins to sell, it's that marvelous confirmation of, this is helpful. It's just like when you speak and you see the faces of people light up when you share something and you have that, oh my gosh, thank you for smiling. Thank you for letting me know this is helpful. That's when the sales began to happen, and it was really cool.
Well, you just gave us 2 really great things right there as litmus tests. One, did I need the answer that was provided in this book? Do I wish that I would have read this before now? That's a huge test. The other test is look at deliver it.
Yeah.
In front of an audience and look at the audience's response and reaction and test it that way. Those are 2 really good tests to see if they're if the content or the idea is life-changing.
No doubt about it. All right, number 2. The second question I would ask, and I do ask myself, is this differentiated from others? Is it distinct? Is it novel? So I cannot overestimate this importance here. Jared, when we do a book in a weekend together, we talk to these aspiring authors to come into the room. You've got to differentiate yourself from other people. It doesn't mean you're always the best in the world. It just means you're different than the others in the world. So years ago, listeners, you might remember hearing about this book called Blue Ocean Strategy. These authors, two authors, talk about the fact that most people, whatever their industry, writing books, selling widgets, you name it, are in a red ocean. It's an ocean that's red with the blood of the competition that's out there fighting for customers. But they said, we suggest you find a blue ocean or create a blue ocean that's blue, free from the competition, because you created a whole new industry. Okay, you follow that, listeners? So the distinctive can be your what or your how, meaning what you're saying may be differentiated, or the way you say it may be differentiated from others. So Jared, again, my best example of this from my life was the habitudes. Habitudes, listeners, in case you don't know what they are, habitudes are images that form leadership habits and attitudes. I don't think much of what I shared is new. Maybe nothing was new, though. So the what wasn't differentiated, but the how. I was teaching leadership with images and conversations and experiences. That was different than others. And it was really geared for the next generation. And I think that's why it sold 3 million copies, is because the how was different. So listeners, think about this. What is your book differentiated from others in its what or its how? I think about people like Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm just spoke at the IMC, didn't he? Oh my gosh, what an incredible guy. Well, when I read his book, The Tipping Point, or when I read his book, David and Goliath, which really isn't even a spiritual book. But it was a great nugget of truth in there. Or his book, Blink. All of these were novel ideas that nobody else really was talking about. And they have been so popular because they were different or even distinct. Remember, we know that word distinct it's not just better than others. It's different. It's nobody else is like it. And that's what I think Malcolm Gladwell did. So that's what I would say is question number 2. Is your book idea differentiated from others? Is it distinct or novel?
Uniqueness is so important, Tim. And it's interesting you brought up Malcolm Gladwell. When he was speaking last week at IMC, he said this quote. He said something to the effect of, I'm not answering questions that people aren't already asking. I don't spend time writing about things that don't answer questions that people aren't already asking. And so the interesting part about that, to your point, those are novel ideas that he's bringing, but it's more really the how than it is the what, because people are asking those questions. He's not going to answer a question people aren't already asking. Yeah. But the way that he answered it was the uniqueness. I think that's a key point for us all to take.
I do too. So listeners, if you're going, well, how will I know if my idea is different and unique and distinct and so forth? Well, start with a Google search. Go Google it, or go on Amazon and say, are there any other books written about it? You need to do a competitive analysis anyway along the way for your book proposal. So why not start with that question? Okay, let's do the next one. Is it simple for people to understand? Now, I got to be honest with you. John Maxwell is the master of this. John has written almost 100 books. And one of the compliments and complaints that John gets is, your books are so simple, right? And sometimes John goes, I know, I don't even know if they should, he even finished that book, Today Matters. Remember, he talked about this and he said, I don't even know if I should hand this into the publisher. It's so simple, but that's what made it sell. Yeah. So readers, I don't know how your brain works. Sometimes I can be overly complicated. And I even bounced a book idea off of John Maxwell. And he said to me, Tim, it's a great idea. It's too complex. It's too complicated. You'll sell 12 copies, for all those PhDs out there, but that's it, Well, I don't want to sell just 12 copies. So I really think we need to go to this huge question and be honest with ourselves. Is it simple for people to understand? Jared, did you know when Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of England, was still around, he would write his speeches, and did you know he would bounce them off of the equivalent of a middle school kid?
Wow.
Yeah, because he thought, I want to talk to Parliament, and if a 13-year-old can understand it, maybe Parliament can understand it, something like that. Yeah, I have gotten because I'm in the academic world so much, I'm with very heady, scholarly, academic types. I can sometimes come up with something that's not simple enough. And we all know that, great communicators take a complex idea and they make it simple. We just need to know that that's going to be huge to take your complicated idea and make it simple.
Sure,
So, yeah,
sure. Well, and it's harder work.
yeah,
It's harder to make it simple.
yeah,
A
it
lot of
really
times
is.
I think that John says put the cookies on the lower shelf
Yeah,
so that they can reach the cookies. That's the same concept. But
yeah, it
for a
really
writer,
is.
a communicator, it's hard work to
Yeah,
drill down to its simplest form so that others can understand it. I love that example of Winston
yeah,
Churchill bringing in an
yeah.
eighth grader. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
it's
Yeah.
cool. It's cool. All right, here's the next one. What's your book's shelf life? So we all know the term shelf life. That basically means how long will it last? How long will it be relevant? Okay. The shelf life of some are very, very short. And that's okay if it's a really good book meeting a need right now. So I guess maybe another question to ask yourself on this one is your book timely or timeless? So a timely book may be a book written for the here and now. It's maybe it's a book on AI, right? Everybody's talking about AI right now. Maybe you've got a great book on AI that maybe a year and a half from now, it's old news. It's old news. It's tired by that time. If it's timeless, and many of John Maxwell's books are, the 21 Laws of Leadership, that's pretty timeless,
Yeah.
That's why it's selling 20 years later, right? So you need to make sure that you go after what you want to go after, but that starts with what's your shelf life? Is it timely or timeless? Do you remember, Jared, the book called The Shack?
Oh
Did
yeah.
that? Oh, yeah. Okay, good, good. The Shack was self-published at first.
Yeah.
And I think by the time I heard about it, it was still self-published, but it was just in the process of transitioning to a bunch of publishers were looking for this thing. Because though the author had shopped it around, he kept getting a no over and over and over. No, 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 no. So finally he just self-published it and got it out there. And he sold tons of them, even though it was self-published. Well, now, at this point, everybody's interested in the book. Well, of course they are. The book's selling a bunch. So I think, listeners, I want you to be thinking about this book idea and you're asking the question, is it timely or timeless? What's the shelf life? Can you be both specific and broad? So think about what I mean by that. Your topic is very specific. It's not written to everybody, but yet it's very specific and it can reach a broad audience because they're all looking for that specific topic. I tell you, the book I'm thinking of right now, Jared, is Jim Collins, who we all love if we love leadership. He wrote a book years ago that I bet you've heard of, listeners. The book was called Good to Great. Remember that book? Good to Great.
Yeah.
And it was based on his research that he did. He's a Stanford guy, and he had a big team of people helping him research. The book was about what do teams and organizations do to help them go from a good company to a great company. And I'm telling you, he nailed it. And that book has sold and sold and keeps on selling. I think if you go on Amazon, you'll still find it's a big seller. So the shelf life question is the one you got to answer if you're gonna do well in your writing process.
I want to go back quickly, Tim, to testing your content on someone or
Yep.
some audiences,
Yeah.
because oftentimes you don't know what the shelf life is until you've tested it and seen if it's meeting a felt need and watching the
Yeah.
reactions of people that are consuming it.
That's right.
And the Shack is such a good example of
Yeah.
the persistence of
Yeah.
the author to keep trying and get it in front of the audience, the intended audience, and then let the audience speak.
That's
Let the
right.
audience determine
Yeah.
the shelf life. Ultimately, that's who's determined. Publishers are not determining the shelf life of the book. It's the audience, the
Yeah.
buyers that are
Yep.
determining that. So
That's
testing
right.
on them early. Don't be afraid to test those ideas.
In fact, test them early. The stakes are low. You haven't gotten the whole thing, out there and spent tens of thousands of dollars. So yeah, the analogy came to my mind, Jared. You'll understand this is just like pastors of churches know that people vote with their feet. They can walk out any day and not come back. Readers vote with their dollars. And so a writer like you and me, folks, you want them to say, I will invest a little bit of my dollars because this concept is so important, so timely, so relevant for my life. Yeah, so that's good. All right, let's do another one. Here's another question I think you ought to ask yourself. Does it lend itself to other ideas, perhaps subordinate ideas? In 2001, I did a book called Nurturing the Leader Within Your Child. Thomas Nelson had approached, actually, John Maxwell and I both with this. And John said, Tim, you should do this book. That's who you are. Well, that book lent itself to another book called 52 Leadership Ideas you can use with kids. So, and by the way, the covers are same color design and everything else. But that Nurturing the Leader in Your Child, which so many parents were concerned about raising their millennial children at the time, they wanted another book that was really practical on what are some projects I can do with my kids to teach them responsibility, to teach them initiative, to teach them discipline, to teach them people skills. So the Nurturing Leader in Your Child idea was really good because it lent to other books. When I wrote the book Artificial Maturity, by the way, the subtitle, Artificial Maturity, Helping Your Kids Meet the Challenge of Becoming Authentic Adults. Not artificial adults, meaning they're socially and emotionally ready to be a grown-up. And many kids were not. They were delayed in their maturity. Well, that book lent itself to another book that I did called 12 Huge Mistakes Parents Can Avoid, because the parents were causing some of the artificial maturity. And I know that sounds terribly crude. Please forgive me if I offended anybody. But just know you want to come up with an idea, and it's really a good one if there's other additional ancillary ideas that come along later sparked by that book. And by the way, that book, 12 Huge Mistakes Parents Can Avoid, that was sparked by a blog. I did a blog called 3 Huge Mistakes We Make Leading Kids. It had 1.2 million shares on Facebook. Well, that was a good tip-off. Woo, I may have something here. And a publisher actually approached me and said, that blog did well, we noticed. What if you turn it into a book? So I'm going to stop there, but here's the big question. Does it lend itself to other ideas, perhaps subordinate ideas?
And listeners, don't miss this. Do you have a LinkedIn? Do you have a Facebook?
Yeah.
Do you have Instagram? Do you have, what platforms do you have that are existing that you can begin testing content on? Do not wait for a publisher to come meet you in Walmart and tap you on the shoulder in the shoe aisle and say, hey, you got a book that I want to put. It's not going to happen. Put it out. You have a LinkedIn. You have somewhere where you can put long form content out there and test it. Tim's a perfect example right here. The publisher came when the publisher saw that there was energy around the idea.
That's right.
Don't wait for the energy don't wait for the publisher to create the energy. The publisher's looking to you to create the energy.
That's so well put, Jared. And by the way, when I did that blog, it didn't cost me a dime. So I didn't have to sink $10,000, but it was a great test place for this. So good word. Okay, let's do one more. The last big question that I thought would be fun to talk about and needed to ask yourself is this. Is it something you would want to read? Does each page make you want to continue? Does it make you want to turn the page? So never, ever, ever pursue a book, listeners, that you wouldn't want to read yourself. You're just kidding yourself if you like the idea, but you don't love the idea. It's nice, but you're not passionate about it. This book that you are thinking about ought to wake you up at night. In fact, I do. I'm often awakened every week of my life with some idea that hits me and it interrupts my sleep. I'm okay with that. And I'll run upstairs and I'll type it out. It won't be written eloquently. I just want to get the idea written down before I go back to sleep. Yeah, this question, is it something you'd want to read? Does it capture your imagination? Ask that question. Does it wake you up at night? If it was written by someone else, would you bet on it? Let me ask that again. If it was written by someone else, would you go, man, I'd buy that book? That's a great acid test. Jared, I'll never forget when I first read the book by Arthur Brooks called From Strength to Strength. That book is a New York Times best-selling book. I remember checking it out when it first came out. I heard Simon Sinek talking to Arthur Brooks about this book. I immediately bought it. And that book, you know what it made me say? When I read that book, my wife said, well, what'd you think? You know what I said to her? Here's what I said to my wife. The only thing I don't like about this book is that I didn't write it myself. That's what I said. And I know I've got a good book. And I told Arthur that. I met him and I had about a half an hour with him. He came down from Harvard University down to Atlanta and he spoke at North Point. And I grabbed him ahead of time. And I said, Arthur, I'm telling you, you're my hero. Can I get a picture with you? And he said, of course. And I told him, I said, the only thing I didn't write about life. And he wondered, what is he going to say? I didn't write it. Dang it. That sort of thing. So, I was willing to, I felt like I was close enough to him already. He was just like the guy next door. He's so down to earth, so approachable. That's a question you ought to ask yourself before you ever write a book. Is it something you would say, this captures my imagination? It makes me, I would write it I would read it if I didn't even write it myself. So
John Maxwell says when he's writing every single page, he asks himself that question: will the reader turn the page?
Yeah.
Will the reader be? Is there enough here, to keep the interest of the reader? And I think you're spot on with that point, Tim.
Yeah, well, I just wish I would have learned this years ago. Maybe these questions don't feel like rocket science, folks, and maybe they're not. But boy, they're a great filter before you take another step to ask them right up front. Jared, I'd love, if you don't mind, before we wrap up, I have a great statement that Winston Churchill, one of my favorite authors and leaders, said way back 70, 75 years ago when he was still with us.
Yeah.
He said something about writing books that I thought was a great cherry on top to this little conversation. Churchill said, writing a book is an adventure. To begin with, it's a toy and an amusement. Then it becomes a mistress. Then it becomes a master. Then it becomes a tyrant. And the last phase is that just as you're about to be reconciled to your servitude, you kill the monster and you fling him to the public. Isn't that Churchillian? I mean, that's the kind of thing he would say. But folks, what I don't want you to miss is this. It's not just a project you've got. It's a thing that, oh my gosh, I'm dating this. Now I'm married to it. Now I can't let go of this thing. And then you feel like it's your master. But when you finally fling that thing to the public, you realize, okay, it has been a tyrant at one point, but now it is out there. And hopefully, people are enjoying it with you. These are the questions I think you ought to be asking along the way.
Incredible. Tim, thanks so much for sharing these today. The 6 questions that are worth asking when you're evaluating your book ideas. We hope that this will help you jumpstart, as we say, move you to the front of the line when it comes to writing your book and getting your message out there, because we believe that the world needs the book in you. Until next time, we'll see you real soon.